He diluted the milk in the bottle with water until it was completely full. This became the family's only meal for the entire day. When his young daughter said she was still hungry, her father told her he had already eaten a huge steak in his dreams, so he was completely full, and he gave all the food to his daughter. Then, before dawn, he left home early. During the Great Depression, having enough to eat was already a luxury. In order to put food on the table, Nick had to walk 2 hours to the docks to look for work. The place was already crowded with men desperate for jobs, but the docks were struggling too. That day, only 9 temporary workers were needed. The foreman randomly picked 9 lucky men. Their children wouldn't have to drink milk diluted with water that night. Unfortunately, Nick was not among them. He could only walk away in disappointment. Who would have thought that the once glorious boxing champion would be reduced to such a state? As soon as he returned home, he found his eldest son sitting dejectedly in the corner. It turned out the boy had stolen a sausage from the butcher shop. Without a word, Nick grabbed his son, marched him back to the butcher, and returned the sausage. On the way home, his son said gloomily that one of his friends was about to be sent away by his parents because they couldn't afford to feed him. His son's words filled Nick with guilt. He took a deep breath and promised his son he would never send any of them away. But keeping 3 children fed was easier said than done. To address their immediate needs, he sought out his agent, Old Joe, who arranged a boxing match for him. Win or lose, he would take home $50. But just before the fight, the agent noticed Nick was hiding an injury to his right hand. Seeing his desperation, Old Joe said nothing more, and simply wrapped an extra layer of bandages around Nick's hand. Yet the match turned disastrous due to his injured right hand. After 6 rounds of fierce fighting, he couldn't gain any advantage. The crowd grew restless, booing the former boxing champion they once cheered. Hearing the insults from the audience, Nick became agitated, and agitation often leads to disaster. He instinctively threw a right punch that landed squarely on his opponent's skull, causing his hand to fracture again. Nick endured the excruciating pain, determined to finish the match, but by then his right hand had gone completely numb. His weak left punches only further disappointed the crowd. Spectators began throwing popcorn into the ring. As the situation threatened to spiral out of control, the referee had no choice but to stop the match early and declare it invalid. Nick's poor performance did not escape the notice of the club owner. After the match, not only did the owner refuse to pay him, but he also revoked Nick's boxing license. Nick had fought 80 matches for this owner, and now, after just one bad performance, he was being cast aside. Unable to believe it, Nick went to plead with the owner in person, but the man showed not an ounce of sympathy. Winter was approaching, and Nick's wife worried they wouldn't be able to afford the heating bill. She suggested sending their 3 children to her sister's house early, so she could free up time to earn money by sewing for others. The moment Nick heard about sending the children away, he immediately refused. Despite his injury, he was still the backbone of the family. He decided to paint the cast on his hand black with shoe polish. As long as the foreman didn't notice the injury, he could try his luck at the docks again. Seeing the exhaustion in Nick's eyes, his wife's eyes welled up with tears. This man, who had never been knocked down in the ring, had been beaten down by life until he was barely recognizable. With his wife's encouragement, Nick's luck began to change. The next day, he was chosen by the foreman, but relying solely on Nick's dock work, it would take months to save up enough to cover the overdue utility bills. The family had reached the brink of despair. Unable to bear seeing the children suffer any longer, his wife made a desperate decision behind Nick's back. She sent the children to her sister's and father's homes. When Nick returned from work and saw the empty rooms, he understood everything. In an instant, his face was filled with despair and self-blame. A man who had always been strong, a boxing champion who had never lost, couldn't even protect his own children. Nick didn't run away. To raise money, he went to the boxing club where he once fought. Everyone there was dressed in suits and ties, including his former boss who had fired him. Swallowing his pride, Nick lowered his head and explained his desperate situation, begging them to spare some money to help him through this crisis. Some couldn't bear to see the former king of the ring reduced to such a state, and tossed loose change into his cap. Others simply watched coldly. When Nick reached his former agent, Old Joe, his eyes were already filled with tears. Without a word, Old Joe made up the full amount Nick needed. Time passed, and by June of the following year, Old Joe suddenly sought out Nick. He told him he had arranged a fight for him. But hadn't Nick's boxing license been revoked? It turned out Old Joe wasn't asking him to fight, but to be a punching bag. The opponent was the world's second-ranked heavyweight boxer. He had a match the next night, but his original opponent had been injured. The boxing club couldn't find anyone else, so they asked Nick to step in as a substitute. All he had to do was take a beating in the ring the next night, and he would earn $250. Nick needed the money too badly to refuse. He agreed without a second thought. But the next day, as soon as Nick stepped into the ring, he saw the world number 2, a muscular, menacing figure. Facing such a formidable opponent, Nick felt no fear. Instead, he was strangely calm. After all, he had nothing left to lose. His only concern was the $250 he would take home. Yet when the announcer shouted Nick's name, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause, paying tribute to him. In that moment, something shifted inside Nick. When the bell rang, the opponent charged at him with a furious onslaught. A series of combination punches caught Nick off guard. Using his physical advantage, the opponent cornered Nick and rained down heavy blows on him like a storm. Within the first round, Nick was knocked to the ground. He faced two choices: stay down and let the referee count him out, then take the $250 and go home, or get up like a man and keep fighting. From somewhere deep within, a surge of strength emerged. Not only did he stand up, but he also fought back. The hardships of life hadn't broken him. What did the world number 2 matter? He quickly landed 2 left punches, catching his opponent by surprise. By the second round, Nick found his rhythm. He started with a heavy punch that stunned his opponent. The more he fought, the more confident he became. His fighting spirit burned brighter, and gradually, the audience sensed it. That man was back. He dodged sideways and landed a straight punch right on his opponent's face, followed by a series of left and right hooks. With just 3 punches, this man who hadn't eaten all day knocked down the world number 2. The entire arena erupted instantly. When the world number 2 got back up, Nick grew even fiercer. He was no longer on the defensive. He was now an enraged bulldog. Amid the cheers of the crowd, Nick's fists fell like a storm, pounding his opponent relentlessly, as if releasing all the oppression he had endured over the past year. It turned out that during his year working at the docks, Nick had been using his left hand to protect his injured right hand. Over time, his left hand had grown incredibly powerful. What was once his weakness had become his greatest strength. The audience rose to their feet, shouting madly. Even the referee was startled and quickly pulled the two apart. But just seconds after being separated, Nick's opponent lost consciousness. As reporters swarmed in, the former boxing champion once again made the headlines. That night, Nick returned home with $250. When the children learned he had won, they rushed to hug him. The family finally enjoyed a hearty dinner together, and their dim, dilapidated home was filled with laughter for the first time in ages. A few months later, Nick faced his second opponent. This man was tall and bulky, a full 2 sizes bigger than Nick. No matter how hard Nick hit him, the man seemed unfazed. With his long arms and legs, he towered over Nick like an adult over a child. Not only that, but he also knew Nick's weaknesses intimately, and targeted his injured ribs intentionally. Within a few rounds, he had broken Nick's ribs. The searing pain nearly made Nick collapse. Fortunately, the bell for the 5th round gave him a moment to catch his breath. But old Joe wouldn't let him sit down to rest. He believed that only by standing could he intimidate his opponent. And when the opponent saw Nick still on his feet during the break, he indeed looked terrified. At the start of the 6th round, the two continued to trade blows fiercely, but the younger opponent had superior stamina, and Nick was struggling to keep up. To conserve energy, he had no choice but to switch to defense, yet his opponent still found an opening, and landed a powerful punch right on Nick's face, sending his mouthguard flying. In that instant, Nick suddenly remembered his young children, how they huddled together on a stiff bed during the cold winter, too poor to afford milk, surviving on soup from the relief agency, eating scraps discarded by the wealthy. He thought of his weary wife, diluting the last drops of milk with water for the children. When Nick snapped back to reality, he glared at his opponent with murderous intensity. This carefree, privileged man who had never known want. In that moment, Nick inexplicably smiled, and launched a frenzied attack. A barrage of left and right hooks bloodied his opponent's nose. His dominance was overwhelming. The entire audience rose to their feet. They witnessed the once defeated, middle-aged boxing champion reclaim his crown. It was a defiance of fate.